33 kilometers of water controls the global economy, and right now, it's closed. Today, we're looking at the situation in the Middle East and how it affects the global economy. This is the AIA Uncut podcast, and let's get started.
Welcome to the deep dive. For anyone trying to make sense of the absolute avalanche of news coming out of the Middle East right now, our mission today is really to just cut through that noise.
Yeah, it's a lot to process for anyone.
It really is. So we are unpacking a massive stack of real-time sources today, all dated early March 2026. We're looking at military timelines, Professor Jiang's geographic game theory, technical reports from Wired, and live crypto market analysis. We're synthesizing all these moving parts so you can basically see the entire board. Right, but before we dig into that data, I think we need to set a really crucial ground rule for you, the listener. The material we are mapping out today involves highly charged, ongoing geopolitical warfare. As your guides through this information, we are completely neutral. We are impartially reporting the facts, the data, and the arguments exactly as they're presented in these March 2026 sources. We are not taking any political sides, nor are we endorsing any of the military actions, policies, or viewpoints of the U.S., Israel, Iran, or any other nation we mentioned today. Our sole objective is to just lay out the reality of the situation on the ground.
Exactly. And to understand that reality, let's start with the physical terrain. Because according to Professor Jiang's data, geography is destiny in this crisis. The focal point of this entire global standoff is the Strait of Hormuz. We all know it's a narrow choke point. It's just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. But Professor Jiang's research puts the sheer vulnerability of that bottleneck into frankly terrifying perspective. Fully 20% of the entire world's liquid oil flows through this one specific waterway.
Which naturally leads to the clarifying question, just how dependent is the rest of the world on this tiny bottleneck? I mean, who specifically holds the bag if that transit route shuts down?
Well, the sources map out what Professor Jiang calls the Asian domino effect. So India pulls 60% of its oil through the strait. China relies on it for roughly 40%, but Japan is the true outlier here. They depend on the Strait of Hormuz for a staggering 75% of their oil supply.
75%. That's almost their entire grid.
Right. And the timeline for Japan is what makes this so critical. Jiang calculates that if the strait remains closed, the Japanese economy wouldn't just experience a severe recession, it would effectively collapse in 8 to 9 months. They physically run out of the fuel required to keep the lights on. You can't power the manufacturing sector, you can't run the logistics networks, you can't even heat homes. And when the world's third largest economy freezes up like that, the global economic dominoes start falling instantly.
Because Japan isn't just a consumer, they're a critical node in global manufacturing.
Exactly. If Japanese automakers and electronics manufacturers halt production because they have no power, supply chains in North America and Europe grind to a halt weeks later. But the stakes actually go far beyond just Asian energy markets. This 33-kilometer waterway is the physical foundation of the American economy, specifically through the petrodollar system.
We should probably break down the mechanics of the petrodollar for the listener, because I feel like it's often treated as this macroeconomic buzzword rather than a physical reality.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Decades ago, an agreement was struck where the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, mandated that their oil must be purchased exclusively in U.S. dollars. If a nation wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia or the UAE, they can't use their own local currency. They have to acquire U.S. dollars first.
Which creates a massive forced global demand for the dollar. Every country needs oil, therefore every country needs dollars. That continuous artificial global demand is precisely what allows the U.S. government to issue debt and fund its own economy at a scale no other nation can match. If the oil stops flowing out of the Gulf, or if that pricing mechanism changes, that baseline demand for the U.S. dollar just evaporates. The U.S. debt model would face a catastrophic reckoning.
But this brings up a fascinating challenge Professor Jiang poses regarding the perceived invincibility of the GCC. They control immense financial wealth and this crucial dollar mechanism, sure, but they possess a fatal geographic vulnerability. These Gulf nations are sitting in a flat, exposed desert.
Yeah, they have almost no natural life-sustaining resources of their own.
Exactly. I mean, they have to import a staggering 80% of their food. Even more critical, because they lack natural aquifers or rivers, 60% of their fresh water comes from highly vulnerable coastal desalination plants. These aren't hidden bunkers. They are massive exposed industrial complexes sitting right on the coastline.
Right. They require enormous intake pipes and constant massive amounts of electricity to push seawater through reverse osmosis membranes. Contrast that flat, exposed desert with Iran's geography just across the water. Iran is essentially a massive mountainous fortress. The Zagros Mountains give them the ultimate tactical advantage. They can embed drone bases, nuclear facilities, missile silos, and launch sites deep within the solid rock.
Making them incredibly difficult to locate, let alone destroy from the air. So you have a geographically indefensible desert relying on fragile, exposed, coastal desalination plants for basic human survival, sitting right next to an impenetrable mountain range. The asymmetry in defensive terrain is stark.
And that exact asymmetry is playing out right now in the early March 2026 data. Operation Epic Fury, which was a highly coordinated strike by the U.S. and Israel, resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. In immediate response, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially closed the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial traffic.
According to the March 6th Maritime Intelligence, the immediate economic impact reads like a literal worst-case scenario. Tanker traffic through the strait has dropped to absolute zero. There are over 150 massive cargo ships and oil tankers just anchored outside the Persian Gulf, unable to move forward. 14 ships have already been actively attacked.
It's just paralyzed the entire region.
And it isn't just the fear of a missile strike keeping those ships anchored. The global insurance markets have completely pulled their coverage for the region. Without maritime insurance, transit becomes economically impossible. No shipping conglomerate is going to risk a $100 million vessel and its cargo without coverage. Consequently, Brent crude oil has surged past $80 a barrel.
With analysts projecting it could easily cross the $100 threshold if the blockade holds. And the retaliation strategy from Iran detailed in the military reports is highly asymmetric. They've launched dozens of ballistic missiles and suicide drones across the Gulf states, hitting strategic targets in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and they even struck a UK military base in Cyprus. Additionally, Hezbollah forces have fully mobilized from Lebanon, creating this intense multi-front pressure cooker.
And we really need to analyze the cultural asymmetry driving this game of chicken. Iran's Shia leadership embraces the ideological concept of martyrdom. They are structurally and psychologically prepared to absorb extreme pain for their cause.
You really have to factor in who actually lives in the GCC because they are heavily materialistic and structurally reliant on expatriates. Take Dubai, for example. The population is roughly 90% foreign.
Right, they aren't citizens.
Exactly. When ballistic missiles start falling on a luxury expat hub, the foreign workforce doesn't stick around to defend the city. They head straight for the airport and flee back to their home countries. The local economy would hollow out overnight.
So with regional chaos fully underway and a global choke point closed, could you break down the three massive escalation triggers identified in the sources? What actually tips this from a contained Middle Eastern conflict into World War III?
Yeah, the intelligence sources identify three specific tripwires. The first is the introduction of ground troops. Historically, that is a nightmare scenario. You cannot conquer a vast mountainous region like Iran with air power alone. The reports estimate it would take a staggering 2 million U.S. ground troops to actually occupy the country and enact any sort of permanent regime change.
2 million. That's a mobilization scale we haven't seen since the Second World War.
Right. The logistics alone would dominate the global economy. You're talking about moving armor, supply lines, medical infrastructure, and millions of personnel across oceans into hostile mountainous terrain. It's a logistical impossibility without transitioning to a full wartime economy. The sheer visibility of moving that many troops makes it a massive escalation.
And what's the second trigger?
The second tripwire is the nuclear threat. Israel maintains a well-known, albeit undeclared, nuclear arsenal. Meanwhile, Iran's nuclear breakout timeline, the time it would take them to enrich enough uranium for a weapon, has been the central point of tension in the region for years. In a scenario where either side perceives an imminent existential threat to its survival, the nuclear option becomes a mathematically thinkable move for military planners.
Which is a terrifying thought.
It is. And the third trigger is the alliance web. The intelligence reports show European militaries, specifically France, Greece, Italy, and the UK, are already actively mobilizing forces. If the West fully commits military assets to this theater, Russia and China are inevitably forced to enter the conflict. They simply have to protect their own energy interests and supply chains in the region.
It really echoes the exact same alliance cascade that triggered World War I, but updated with modern superpowers.
So this is it for part one of this deep dive into the current situation in the Middle East. Be sure to subscribe to AIA Uncut so you don't miss part two, where we look at the ramifications and its impact on the worlds of decentralized finance and artificial intelligence. See you in the next one.